Early that month, evidence presented to the UK Parliament in London revealed that a Russian research ship operating in the Weddell Sea region between the Antarctic Peninsula in the west and Greater Antarctica in the east discovered a truly gargantuan oil field there, estimated to contain a deposit of approximately 511 billion barrels, which is an absolutely absurd amount of oil. For reference, the oil contained within this one Antarctic superfield is roughly double the amount of oil reserves controlled by Saudi Arabia. Or, put another way, the oil in this Antarctic superfield is roughly 10 times the amount of oil that the entire North Sea has collectively produced over the past 50 years. British members of Parliament cautioned in 2024 that the Russian discovery here could become a prelude to countries or companies hauling in their offshore drilling platforms to exploit the field. And, most alarmingly of all, the discovery was made directly in the epicenter of the most widely disputed part of the frozen continent that is simultaneously claimed by the United Kingdom and Argentina, and partially by Chile as well. But for now, straight-up drilling for oil in the Weddell Sea here is illegal under international law because of something known as the Antarctic Treaty, an international treaty that has its origins in the mid-20th century. You see, up until the late 1950s, Antarctica was theoretically a free-for-all land open to exploitation, settlement, and colonization from anyone brave enough to try it. It was simply the continent's extremely remote location and extremely hostile environment that kept most people from ever trying. But not everyone. 7 countries officially staked out their own territorial claims to Antarctic territory during the early 20th century, including New Zealand, Australia, France, and Norway, and the sharply competing overlapping claims of the United Kingdom, Argentina, and Chile. All of these countries' territorial claims in Antarctica were based on their pre-existing legal claims or control of territory nearby to Antarctica, such as New Zealand's and Australia's home territories, France's relatively nearby Crozet and Kerguelen Islands, and Norway's Bouvet Island. Similarly, the UK's claimed territory in Antarctica largely came out of an extension of their claims to the Falkland Islands, along with South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands nearby, while Argentina's almost identical overlapping claim to Antarctica was based not only on their own territorial mainland, but also on their identical competing claims to the same islands claimed by Britain, the Falklands, along with South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, while Chile's territorial claims were also based on the proximity of their mainland territory. The territorial disputes on Antarctica itself between the UK, Argentina, and Chile, and between Argentina and the UK over all of these other islands was heating up in the mid-20th century, and risked escalating into violence. And so, within the context of the greater Cold War that was going on between the United States and the Soviet Union at the time, a group of 12 countries got together in 1959 and signed the Antarctic Treaty, which primarily sought to figuratively freeze the Antarctic continent in a sort of stasis just as it was, and prevent the use of the continent for any military purposes while preserving it for scientific research and access. Military operations on Antarctica were agreed by everyone to be severely restricted. Nuclear tests and detonations, as well as dumping of nuclear waste on Antarctica, were all agreed to be banned. And a powerful independent monitoring system was put into place that enabled any country to inspect any other country's facilities on the continent without warning to make sure they were actually abiding by all of the terms of the treaty. Antarctica, as defined by the treaty, consists of all the land, ice, islands, and ocean below the 60 degrees of latitude line. The 7 countries who had already made territorial claims to Antarctica before the treaty was signed had their claims frozen and they became legally unenforceable. The US and the Soviet Union and later Russia reserved themselves the right to stake out their own territorial claims to Antarctica at some undetermined point in the future, while any country from around the world was eligible to join the treaty and establish research bases on the continent wherever they deemed fit, regardless of any other country's territorial claims. And perhaps most importantly, the treaty explicitly forbids the harvesting of any of Antarctica's potential resources or even prospecting for the continent's potential resources. No mining or drilling for resources on Antarctica have been allowed ever since. As a result, up to the present day in 2024, there are dozens of active research stations and bases dotted all across the Antarctic continent that belong to no less than 55 different countries from all around the world, many of them being within the zones of the continent's territory that's theoretically claimed by other countries. The United States runs by far the biggest base on the continent at McMurdo within the part of the continent that's claimed by New Zealand. During the warmer summer months, McMurdo can host up to 1,500 residents, which is also about a third of the entire human population that's on Antarctica during those months. The US also runs the Amundsen Scott Research Station at the geographical South Pole. And while the dozens of other countries' bases are located all across the rest of the continent, most of them are heavily concentrated in the relatively warmer Antarctic Peninsula that stretches up towards the southern tip of South America. Argentina and Chile, however, as the two countries that are geographically the closest ones to Antarctica, have put much more effort than any of the others into actually solidifying their territorial claims to the continent. They are the only two countries who have so far gone to the lengths of actually establishing permanent civilian settlements on the frozen continent. The Argentinians at Esperanza base on the Antarctic Peninsula, and the Chileans nearby the peninsula on King George Island with their Villa Las Estrellas. The populations of each of these settlements only ranges from a few dozen in the winters to only a little more than 100 in the summers, which is, interestingly, roughly equal to the population of the first permanent colony that the English established in America at Roanoke back in the 16th century. In the 1970s and 80s, the Argentinian and Chilean governments both began sending pregnant women to their settlements in Antarctica so that they would give birth to Argentinian and Chilean citizens on Antarctic soil, and therefore strengthen their national claims to the territories of Antarctica that they claimed sovereignty over. This culminated with the first human being ever born on the Antarctic continent, with Emilio Marcos Palma on the 7th of January 1978, who's been followed by at least 10 additional Argentinian and Chilean children since then. Since that time, Argentina and Chile have even built up schools in their permanent settlements on Antarctica that children are currently busy attending right now. And remember that in addition to disputing territory in Antarctica, Argentina and the United Kingdom also more bitterly dispute the sovereignty of the nearby Falkland Islands, along with South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands as well. This dispute has, historically, been far more controversial than their disputed claims in Antarctica, because, unlike Antarctica, thousands of people actually live here. The Falklands are presently controlled by the UK and have a population of about 3,600 British citizens, which is gigantic compared to the population of settlements in Antarctica. The UK has nearly continuously administered the Falkland Islands for nearly 2 centuries since the 1830s. But for various historical and geographic reasons, Argentina has heavily disputed Britain's control of them for the 2 centuries ever since. The dispute infamously came to a climax in 1982 when Argentina unexpectedly launched a full-scale amphibious invasion of the Falklands, along with South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, which sparked a 10-week-long war between Argentina and the UK around the islands that killed nearly 1,000 soldiers and wounded more than 2,000 others, with major naval losses suffered on both sides. Argentina's invasion of the islands ended up being decisively defeated by the British. The islands have remained within the UK ever since, and the dispute over the Falklands between them, while continuing, has largely moved away into the very far background of geopolitics that is rarely brought up today in the context of much larger disputes going on in Ukraine and the Middle East. But with that recent Russian-made discovery of 511 billion barrels of oil down there in the middle of both of their claims in Antarctica, the Falklands question could be brought back to the forefront for both London and Buenos Aires sooner rather than later. With the current market price for a barrel of Brent crude oil being $86.70 when I wrote this video on the 3rd of July 2024, those 511 billion barrels of oil in the Weddell Sea could, theoretically, be worth something to the tune of $44 trillion, almost double the entire GDP of the United States. If a country or a corporation could control this Antarctic oil field and didn't give a damn about international law and the Antarctic Treaty System, they could literally manage to eclipse even Saudi Arabia as the world's mightiest oil power and completely transform their entire civilization in the process, which is a whole hell of an incentive to actually do it. The only thing standing in the way right now from anybody doing that, on paper, is the Antarctic Treaty System, that strictly forbids anyone from harvesting Antarctica's resources beneath the 60-degree latitude line. But that treaty is actually up for review in only 24 years from now, in 2048. And any country involved with the treaty is legally able to walk away from it and withdraw whenever they want to. Right now, the 511 billion barrels of oil that the Russians apparently discovered here are better to think of as deposits rather than as reserves, since nobody can legally access them. But when the Antarctic Treaty comes up for review in 2048, Argentina, the UK, Chile, and maybe even other outside powers will become heavily motivated to begin allowing drilling and mining to take place in Antarctica if they stand to gain trillions of dollars by doing so. The ice cover in the Weddell Sea where the oil field was discovered is thinning out with climate change, and is increasingly becoming easier to access by ship or offshore oil rig. while the Antarctic Peninsula to the west protects the sea a bit from the often violent oceanic swell that swirls around the continent above it. Nonetheless, Antarctica and the Weddell Sea is still a very difficult place to actually work in for now. The location is extremely remote and thousands of kilometers away from civilizational centers in Argentina or South Africa, while icebergs and ice flows within the sea can still pose a grave challenge to the stability and safety of offshore oil platforms. Extracting the oil deposit here will undoubtedly be a prohibitively expensive venture to try and undertake. Which means that, for now, even if a country like Russia didn't really care about violating international law by extracting the oil, they'd still have to deal with the cold financial calculus being against them that simply makes extracting the oil not very economically feasible. But again, in the not-too-distant future, as the ice cover in the Weddell Sea thins out with climate change, and as the Antarctic Treaty officially comes up for review in 2048, some states may be open to trying out their shot. And if Argentina can actually finally get its economic act together over the next couple of decades, they might also become interested in challenging the United Kingdom over the status of the Falkland Islands again. It is the UK's control over the Falklands, along with the uninhabited South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, that forms the legal basis for the UK's territorial claim in Antarctica nearby that overlaps directly with the Argentinians' claim and with the gigantic Russian-discovered oil field. Hypothetically, if, and it's a huge if, Argentina were to somehow miraculously become capable of pushing the British out of the Falklands, then Argentina would greatly weaken the British claim in Antarctica that overlaps their own, and they would greatly strengthen their own claim to the gigantic oil field, which could allow the country to radically transform itself the same way that Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates did after the Antarctic Treaty comes up for review in 2048, by allowing themselves to actually begin extracting some to even all of that oil. And at the same time, the UK will be well aware of this potential challenge in the coming decades that Argentina and potentially other nations like Russia could mount against them in the area. And so, they will also be heavily incentivized to maintain their control over the Falklands, South Georgia, and the South Sandwich Islands at all costs, to maintain their own claim in Antarctica and to the giant oil field as well. For whoever maintains control over the field after 2048 could, potentially, become the world's next Saudi Arabia. And for that reason, the future of the Antarctic continent is a deeply uncertain one.